Hello, beautiful knitters. Welcome back to another one of my tutorials. I'm Steph, your friendly neighborhood yarn addict. Today I'm going to show you how to make this cool little brim that can be added to any hat, really. And I came up with this a few years ago, and honestly I never really wanted to share it, but it has become part of several of my patterns, and so I figured I should make a nice tutorial for people following my patterns, and then also for just everybody that wants to learn how to incorporate this into their hats. I think it's pretty convenient. It looks really cool. It's stylish. It keeps the sun out of your eyes. It keeps rain and snow off your face. And I've really come to like the way that these hats fit. So without further ado, here is how you make the brim. We'll begin with the materials needed to make this brim. First of all, we'll need to have a finished hat, of course, and then we're going to need hopefully a lighter weight yarn, such as worsted weight, in a similar color. So here we have Malabrigo Mecha, which is a light bulky yarn that was used to make this hat, and now we have Malabrigo worsted weight in a very similar color, which will be appropriate for a brim. We'll also need a set of needles, size US 1 or 2. I typically like wooden needles, but for when I'm doing projects that require very small needles, I like to use metal because I tend to break them. So metal is not really my favorite as far as feel, but in this case they're so thin and tiny that a metal one would be more durable. Lastly, we're going to need a plastic stencil cut in the shape of your desired brim. I have a stencil, a sample stencil in the pattern that you can trace and cut. I usually use those disposable cutting boards that I find in Amazon. I'll leave a link to the product I use in the description below. And you just cut it out in the shape. Now, the stencil that I have in the pattern is just a suggestion. Sometimes I like to cut it a little bit smaller, and sometimes I like to make it bigger, depending on whether it's a women or men's hat. And basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be knitting around the stencil. So we're going to basically going to be knitting in the round around the stencil, and then at the very end we're going to bind off using Kitchener stitch. We want to begin with the bottom row, which means we're going to start from this side, work our way to the left, and then come back around and make a circle for the brim. We're going to be picking up stitches, okay? We're going to pick up 40 stitches if we're using size 1 needles. And if you have a size 2 needle, you can typically do 36 or 38, depending on the size of your brim. So we're going to be picking up the stitches the following way. And this is going to create the right amount of tension for your hat. So the way I do it is I will pick up using the working yarn. Of course, ignore the tail. And we're going to pick up 3 stitches in a row, and then we're going to skip 1. So there's the next one right there. We're going to skip it, and we're going to go for another 3. Okay. And notice that I'm using the very edge of this folded brim. We want to use the very first row once we switch to all knit from the knit 2 purl 2. So we're doing knit 2 purl 2 for about 10 or 12 rows depending on your pattern, and then we switch to all knit, and that very first row of knit is where we are picking up these stitches. So we have done 6, we're skipping 1, 1, 2, 3 in a row, skipping 1, 1, 2, 3 in a row, skip 1, and so on. So we have 39 stitches. We've been picking up 3 in a row, skip 1 this entire time. And now we're at 39, and we're gonna make the very last one. I typically pick up the very next one, even though it's the one that we usually skip, but it's our last one, and I want the edges to be consistent with each other. Make sure that when you're picking these up, you're making it as tight as possible. You want these to be as tight as possible, and then you won't have any gaps at the very beginning of your brim. Okay, now that we have 40, we're gonna go ahead and turn it around. We're just gonna look and see if that ratio is what you want. The ratio from the amount of brim to the rest of the hat. As with everything that I make for myself, I like to try it on as I go, and that's the best way for me to figure out if I'm making something the right size. So in order to figure out if this was the correct spacing for picking up your stitches according to your size and how tight and loose you want it, so the correct tension for your brim, is to try it on. So I go ahead and try it on, and then I feel where the edges are, and then I hold up my brim and just quickly feel it and test, and imagine that pretty soon this plastic brim is going to be wrapped around the yarn. Obviously the brim's not elastic, so you have to make sure that the size and the tension is correct, making the rest of the hat not too tight, not too loose, but just right for the size that you want to make. Now that spacing that I showed you, the picking up 3, skipping 1, has pretty much worked universally for every hat that I've made, and I haven't had very many complaints using that technique. Once we try it on and we see that we like the spacing and we like the size of our brim, we're going to go ahead and turn it over. And this part's a little bit easier because it doesn't really require much thought. You're basically picking up in the exact spot as you picked up on the previous side, except for the very first one. So the very first one, you want to use this stitch right here, or this stitch right here. Something different, because obviously you can't use this stitch to pick up your very first stitch because it wouldn't work. So you go ahead and pick up your stitch right here. You're making sure that you're making it as tight as possible, okay? You want to still be able to knit, but try to make it as tight as you can so that you don't have any holes or gaps when you insert your plastic brim. So here we pick up in the exact same stitches as the previous row. We are picking up another 40 stitches. You're trying to make these stitches as small as possible because you're trying to hide the plastic stencil underneath the yarn. We have completed 10 rows, and that's not counting your very first row where you picked up the stitches, okay? So that's just a preparation row, and then we're going to knit 10 rows beyond that. And from now on, your beginning of row is going to be in the middle of the round. So from now on, the rounds are going to begin on the top side of the hat rather than the bottom side. And that's because we want this bottom lip to be slightly longer than the top once we get to the very end and we bind all the stitches together with the Kitchener stitch. So this is now the beginning of row, and we're going to start our decreases. So basically we have 10 rows on this side, and then of course 11 rows on this side. So it's technically 10.5 rows. We started decreasing. And what that's going to mean is on each edge, we're going to, if we want this decrease to be facing this way, following the contour of the stencil, we want to do slip, slip, knit. And then when we arrive to this side, we're going to do knit two together. Then we flip it over and we're going to do slip, slip, knit, and then knit two together. And that's going to be a decrease round. So we basically have 4 decreases in this entire round. Slip, slip, knit. We want to pull quite tight because we don't want any gaps at this point anywhere in the brim area. We're almost halfway through this round, and we're doing knit two together on this side, spin it around, and again we want our stitch to be facing that way, so we do slip, slip, knit when it's the beginning. Okay, and we're at the end of our decrease row. First decrease row, we're gonna knit two together. And now, following our pattern, we're gonna do decrease row followed by all knit for the next several rows according to your brim pattern. Alright, so I have completed 3 decrease rows and 3 knit rows after the decreases, and I'm going to test fit my stencil. And I do this many times throughout the work so that I can find the perfect fit for my brim. I have written the pattern down, but this is kind of a guidance. It's not set in stone, and I want you to be flexible with your specific stencil, especially if you've modified the one that I have in the pattern as a sample. And that's totally okay. This is a guidance for you to be creative and make it your own. So I've done 3. At one point, I'm going to stop doing the every other row decrease, and I'm going to move it into every row decrease until I'm ready to just close it up with the Kitchener stitch. Right now I have 4 decrease rows, and it's every other row is a decrease. So I have decrease and then knit, decrease, knit 4 times. The way that I decide to start doing only decreases every row is just by seeing how much I have left to do. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and switch to every row will be a decrease row, because I have a little bit of room here past the edge that I need to get rid of. And I only have, if I really stretch it out, because it's going to be quite stretched by the time you close it up, if I really stretch it out, I only have 2 or 3 rows left before I'm going to go ahead and close this up. At this point, I've done 3 decrease rounds in a row. I have 7 decrease rounds in total. The first 4 were every other round, and now the last 3 were consecutive, 3 in a row. I'm going to test fit my stencil. So I go ahead and put it on here, and then I make sure these edges are all the way to the edge. So I pull those, and this is supposed to fit really tight, okay? So It's going to be a little bit harder to close it up with the Kitchener stitch the tighter it is, but it's going to look better as far as it's supposed to be a really snug fit with your stencil. So at this point, I'm pulling it all the way and it's covering the stencil. So I'm going to go ahead and close it up now. I'm going to cut a tail that's about 4 times this length. I have my tapestry needle right here. And of course we end with the bottom row, right? And we're gonna go ahead and slide these needles and get started on our Kitchener stitch technique. And you can start to see that this very edge now looks like just another knitted row, but it's actually attaching the top and the bottom side. As I'm approaching the end, notice that you will be able to see the plastic a little bit, but that's okay. At the end of it, I just kind of slide this down to make the top more uniform, and it's looking pretty good. Okay, with the very last stitches, and we just drop them, pull it nice and tight, and then what I do with this is I try to make it as uniform as possible. So I just go ahead and go this way. You'll have a tiny little bulge there, but that's okay. You could always, if you wanted to, grab one part of it, pull it, and then I just go right in here and come through this side like that. I see how there's a minimal bulge here at all, nice and smooth, and then I weave in my ends on this side here. I go ahead and do the same thing at the beginning, just weave in the ends, and we're all set. Here we go. Our brim is all done. Pretty neat, huh? Well, I hope you enjoyed that little tutorial, and now you're off to make your very own brimmed hat. And Delta and I are gonna go enjoy some snow because it's winter here in Alaska. We'll see you on the next video.